The service corridor beneath the Whitmore Estate smelled like lemon polish and broken dreams. 12-year-old Marcus Williams sat on an overturned cleaning bucket, sketching strange patterns in a worn notebook, while his mother scrubbed floors for billionaires. When Vincent Harrington spotted the quiet black boy watching his exclusive poker game, he thought he'd found the perfect joke to entertain his powerful friends. He invited Marcus to the table with a mocking smile, expecting to humiliate a child in front of senators and CEOs. But Vincent Harrington had made a fatal miscalculation. He'd underestimated the boy who studied silence, who mapped human weakness like algorithms, and who'd been preparing for this moment longer than anyone knew. By the time the billionaire realized his mistake, Marcus Williams had already begun dismantling an empire built on cruelty. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The service corridor beneath the Whitmore Estate smelled like lemon polish and old carpet. Dim fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Most people would find the space depressing, claustrophobic even, but 12-year-old Marcus Williams had learned to make himself comfortable anywhere. He sat on an overturned cleaning bucket, his back against the concrete wall, a worn spiral notebook balanced on his knees. While other kids his age were glued to video games or scrolling through social media, Marcus filled pages with something entirely different. Numbers arranged in peculiar patterns. Diagrams that looked like decision trees branching into infinity. Probability calculations that would make a statistics professor do a double-take. His mother, Diana Williams, pushed a supply cart past him, her cleaning uniform crisp despite the long day. She paused, glancing down at his notebook with that expression she always wore when she saw him working. Pride mixed with something else. Worry, maybe, or fear. "What are you working on, baby?" she asked softly. Marcus looked up, his dark eyes thoughtful behind cheap reading glasses he'd gotten from the pharmacy. "Just patterns, Mama. How people make choices." Diana's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She knelt down beside him, her voice dropping even lower. "Marcus, I need you to listen to me very carefully tonight. When we go upstairs, you stay quiet. You don't touch anything. You don't ask questions. And you definitely don't let them see you being too curious. Do you understand?" It wasn't the first time she'd given him this speech. Diana had worked in houses like this for years, moving from one mansion to another, always keeping her head down, always maintaining perfect invisibility. Marcus knew his mother wasn't uneducated or naturally submissive. She had a sharpness in her eyes that suggested a different past, a different life before he was born. But she never talked about it, and he'd learned not to ask. "I understand, Mama," he said, closing his notebook. She kissed his forehead and stood up, smoothing her uniform. "Good, because the people upstairs tonight, they're not like the regular rich folks. They're different, dangerous different." Marcus tucked his notebook into his backpack and followed his mother through the winding corridors. The Whitmore Estate sprawled across 12 acres in the most exclusive part of Connecticut. Tonight, it was hosting something special, something that happened once a month, always on a Friday, always with the same tight security and the same group of powerful men. As they climbed the service stairs, Marcus could hear voices echoing from the main floor. Deep, confident voices that commanded attention. The kind of voices that were used to being obeyed. Diana led him to a small sitting room off the main hall. Leather furniture, shelves lined with books that probably had never been opened, a window overlooking manicured gardens lit by spotlights. "You wait here," she instructed. "I'll come get you when we're ready to leave. Read your book. Stay quiet." Marcus nodded and settled into one of the chairs, pulling out a library book about game theory. But reading was the furthest thing from his mind. Through the partially open door, he could see into the grand room across the hall. The poker room. It was magnificent in a way that felt almost threatening. A massive circular table dominated the center, covered in deep green felt. Crystal chandeliers cast perfect light across the playing surface. Armed security guards stood at each entrance, their faces blank, their hands never far from concealed weapons. And the men gathering around that table were unlike anyone Marcus had ever seen up close. There was Senator Caldwell, whose face Marcus recognized from news broadcasts, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile practiced and empty. Next to him sat Richard Pemberton, a tech billionaire whose company had just gone public for $12 billion. Across the table, Marcus spotted General Harrison, retired but still carrying himself like he commanded armies. An oil heir whose name Marcus couldn't remember. A venture capitalist famous for destroying startups and absorbing their assets. But the man who commanded the room, who drew every eye and dominated every conversation, was their host. Vincent Harrington. Marcus had heard the name whispered among the other staff members. Some spoke it with admiration, others with barely concealed hatred. Vincent Harrington had built an empire from nothing, or so the legend went. Hedge funds, real estate, technology investments, media companies. He had his fingers in everything, and he played the markets like most people played video games. Vincent stood at the head of the table, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his tailored suit probably worth more than Diana made in a year. He was in his early 50s, handsome in that sharp, predatory way some powerful men achieved. His eyes missed nothing, constantly scanning, calculating, measuring. "Gentlemen," Vincent's voice cut through the murmur of conversation like a blade. "Shall we begin separating the sharks from the guppies?" Laughter rippled around the table. These men were comfortable with cruelty disguised as humor. Marcus watched as chips were distributed. Not the cheap plastic kind from a toy store. These were custom ceramic, weighted perfectly, each one representing thousands of dollars. The stacks rose like miniature skyscrapers in front of each player. His mother moved through the room like a ghost, refilling drinks, emptying ashtrays, completely ignored by the men who treated her as living furniture. Marcus's stomach tightened, watching her forced invisibility. The game began with casual conversation, but Marcus could sense the real competition beneath the surface. Every bet, every fold, every raise carried psychological weight. Vincent Harrington wasn't just playing cards. He was playing people. "Richard, that's the third time you've touched your cufflink before folding," Vincent observed, his voice light but his eyes deadly serious. "Tell me, is it a nervous habit, or are you telegraphing weakness on purpose?" Richard's face flushed. "Just a habit, Vincent. Habits are windows into character," Vincent replied, dragging a massive pot toward himself. "And character determines everything." Marcus found himself completely absorbed. This wasn't just gambling. It was psychological warfare conducted with cards and chips instead of weapons. Every player had tells, patterns, weaknesses that Vincent seemed to catalog effortlessly. The senator bluffed too often when he was losing. The general played too conservatively, treating poker like a military operation that required overwhelming force before engagement. The venture capitalist bet aggressively on mediocre hands, unable to separate his poker strategy from his business strategy of bullying others into submission. And Vincent exploited every single weakness without mercy. Marcus shifted in his chair, tried to get a better angle. The movement caught Vincent's eye. For just a second, their gazes locked across the distance. Marcus felt like he'd been scanned by some kind of machine, cataloged, and filed away. Vincent's attention returned to the game, but Marcus noticed him glancing toward the sitting room several more times over the next hour. Diana appeared in the doorway, silently checking on him. Marcus gave her a small smile to show he was fine. She returned to her duties, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. Another hour passed. The pots grew larger. The atmosphere grew heavier. One player, a hedge fund manager Marcus hadn't noticed before, lost spectacularly on what should have been a winning hand. He'd misread Vincent's expression, convinced himself that a straight beat a flush, and pushed all his chips forward only to realize his mistake too late. Vincent didn't gloat. That would have been beneath him. Instead, he simply collected the chips with the same expression someone might wear while picking up their dry cleaning. The defeated man excused himself, his face pale, his career likely damaged just by the story that would circulate about his spectacular failure. "This is why I love poker," Vincent announced to the remaining players. "It reveals truth. You can fake confidence in a boardroom. You can buy loyalty. You can even purchase respect. But at this table, with real stakes and real pressure, every man shows exactly who he is. It was meant as philosophy, but Marcus heard it as a weapon. Vincent used these games to collect leverage, to understand the powerful men around him, to find their pressure points for future use. "Vincent, where's the rest of your staff?" Senator Caldwell asked during a break in the dealing. "Usually you have a full service team." "Budget cuts," Vincent replied with a smile that said he'd never worried about budgets in his life. "Tonight, we're running lean. Just Diana and her." He paused mid-sentence, his eyes drifting back toward the sitting room where Marcus sat. "Diana," Vincent called out, his voice friendly but carrying an edge of command that couldn't be refused. "Is that your son in the other room?" Diana appeared immediately, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes, sir. I apologize if he's been any disturbance." "He's very quiet." "No disturbance at all," Vincent said, waving his hand dismissively. "Bring him in. Let's have a look at him." Marcus felt his mother's fear before he saw it. She moved toward him quickly, her voice an urgent whisper. "Remember what I told you. Be polite. Say as little as possible. Don't." "Diana, sometime tonight would be lovely," Vincent called out, his patience clearly wearing thin. Marcus stood and followed his mother into the poker room. Every eye turned toward him. He felt like a specimen under observation, something exotic and out of place in this world of power and money. Vincent studied him with undisguised curiosity. "How old are you, son?" 12, sir," Marcus replied quietly. 12. Vincent smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You know what I was doing at 12? Working in my uncle's warehouse, loading trucks, building character through manual labor." "What do you do, Marcus?" "That is your name, right?" "Yes, sir. I read mostly. Study patterns." "Patterns?" Vincent's smile widened. "Like what kind of patterns?" Marcus hesitated, glancing at his mother. She gave the tiniest shake of her head, but Vincent caught it. "It's okay, Diana. Let the boys speak. We're all friends here." The way he said friends made it clear that friendship was not on offer. "Mathematical patterns, sir. Probability. How systems work. How choices connect to outcomes." The table went silent. Several of the men exchanged glances. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Gentlemen," Vincent said slowly, an idea clearly forming. "I think we need some fresh blood at this table. What do you say we deal in a real underdog?" Senator Caldwell laughed. "Vincent, you can't be serious." "Why not?" "The kid studies patterns. Probability. Sounds like he's been training for poker." Vincent's eyes glittered with something dark and amused. "Come on, where's your sense of adventure? When's the last time you played against someone completely unpredictable?" "He's a child," General Harrison said, though he didn't sound particularly concerned about Marcus's well-being. More like he was pointing out a technical irregularity. "A child who studies probability," Vincent countered. "I'd say that makes him more qualified than half the trust fund babies I know. Besides, we'll make it interesting. Give him a small stack. See what he can do. Consider it entertainment." Richard Pemberton leaned forward. "I'll put up 5,000 to sponsor his stack. This I've got to see." "Make it 10, the venture capitalist added. "Let's give the kid a real shot." Diana stepped forward, her voice strained but firm. "Mr. Harrington, I appreciate the offer, but Marcus shouldn't." "Oh, come now, Diana. We're not going to hurt the boy. We're offering him an education. Do you know what some people pay for a seat at this table? For the chance to play with men of this caliber." Vincent's voice was smooth, persuasive, completely reasonable on the surface. "We'll keep the stakes friendly. Teach him a game. Who knows? Maybe he's got natural talent." The other men were nodding now, grinning, treating the whole thing like an amusing diversion. Marcus understood immediately what they saw. A black kid from the service quarters, sitting down with billionaires and senators. It was a joke to them, a circus act, something to laugh about later at their country clubs. His mother's hand tightened on his shoulder. He could feel her wanting to grab him and run, to get him away from these men and their casual cruelty disguised as opportunity. But Marcus surprised them both. "It's okay, Mama," he said quietly, looking up at her. "I'd like to try." Diana's eyes went wide. "Marcus, you don't understand." "I understand," he said, and something in his voice, some unexpected calm, made her pause. I'll be careful. I promise. Vincent clapped his hands together. Excellent. Pull up a chair, young man. Let's see what you're made of. They cleared a space at the table, bringing in a slightly smaller chair so Marcus could reach the felt. Chips were stacked in front of him, not as many as the other players, but still representing more money than he'd seen in his entire life. His mother stood against the wall, her hands clasped together, her face a mask of controlled terror. Vincent leaned close to Marcus, his expensive cologne overwhelming, his voice carrying a mix of amusement and challenge. Let's see this genius everyone's been hiding in the service corridor, kid. Let's see what you've really got. The dealer shuffled and began distributing cards. Marcus picked his up slowly, careful not to let anyone see them. Ace of spades, 7 of hearts. Not a particularly strong starting hand in Texas Hold'em. But Marcus wasn't looking at his cards anymore. He was watching the men around the table. The way Senator Caldwell's left eye twitched slightly when he looked at his hand. The way Richard Pemberton shifted his weight when he was pleased with what he'd been dealt. The way the venture capitalist, whose name Marcus had learned was Thomas Bradford, rubbed his thumb across his chips in a specific pattern when preparing to bluff. Most tellingly, Marcus watched Vincent, the man who claimed to read everyone else so effortlessly. Marcus noticed that Vincent had a habit of touching the corner of his mouth with his index finger when he was genuinely uncertain about his next move. It happened for just a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but it was there. The first round of betting began. Marcus folded quickly, not because his hand was weak, but because he was still gathering data. He needed to see more, understand more, before committing to any particular strategy. Smart fold, Vincent commented. Conservative play for a first-timer. I can respect that. The hand played out. Thomas Bradford won with an aggressive bluff that worked because Senator Caldwell second-guessed himself at the crucial moment. Marcus filed the information away. The second hand was dealt. This time Marcus had pocket queens, a strong starting hand, the kind of hand that inexperienced players got excited about and overplayed. Marcus called the initial bet, matching it exactly without raising. Several players looked surprised. They'd expected either a nervous fold or an overconfident raise from a kid playing with house money. The flop came down. Queen of diamonds, 4 of clubs, 9 of spades. Marcus now had 3 queens, an incredibly strong hand. But his face remained completely neutral. Vincent raised. Richard folded. General Harrison called. Thomas Bradford raised again, testing the table. Marcus studied Thomas carefully. The thumb movement had happened. This was a bluff, Marcus was certain. Thomas had nothing and was trying to buy the pot with aggression. Marcus called, not raising, just matching. The subtle play confused the table. If he had a strong hand, why not raise? If he had a weak hand, why call at all? The turn card, 2 of hearts. Meaningless for most hands. Thomas bet big, doubling down on his bluff. Vincent folded with obvious reluctance. General Harrison folded as well, muttering something about reckless youth. It was just Marcus and Thomas now. You sure about this, kid? Thomas asked, his voice friendly, but his eyes cold. That's a lot of money for someone your age to lose. Marcus didn't respond. He simply pushed chips forward to call. The river card, Jack of diamonds. Still nothing that would help most hands. Thomas went all in, pushing his entire remaining stack forward. It was a massive overbet, designed to terrify Marcus into folding. The room went completely silent. Diana made a small sound of distress. Marcus looked at his chips, then at Thomas, then back at his chips. Every eye was on him, waiting to see the child crack under pressure. I call, Marcus said quietly. Thomas's face went white. He flipped over his cards. King high, absolutely nothing. His bluff had been called. Marcus showed his 3 queens. The room erupted in noise. Richard Pemberton laughed so hard he nearly fell out of his chair. General Harrison shook his head in disbelief. Senator Caldwell looked personally offended that a child had just taken down one of the table's most aggressive players. Vincent said nothing. He just watched Marcus with an expression that was impossible to read. Thomas Bradford stood up, his face flushed with humiliation. This is ridiculous. The kid got lucky. Pure billionaires. "Sit down, Thomas," Vincent said softly. "You got outplayed. Accept it with grace." Thomas sat, but his hands were shaking with barely controlled rage. Marcus began stacking his chips into neat, organized piles. Not celebrating, not gloating, just organizing with the same methodical attention he gave to everything else. "Interesting call," Vincent observed, dealing the next hand himself. "Most people would have raised with 3 queens. Why didn't you?" Marcus looked up at him. "I didn't need to, sir. I knew what he had." "Knew? Or guessed?" "Knew." Vincent's smile returned, but now there was something different behind it. Not amusement. Something sharper. More interested. "Deal him in again," Vincent said to nobody in particular. "I want to see if that was skill or luck." The game continued, but the energy had shifted completely. Marcus wasn't a novelty anymore. He was a variable they hadn't accounted for. An unknown quantity that had just proven it could bite. Diana stood frozen against the wall, watching her son navigate waters that had drowned grown men. And Marcus sat calmly at the table, his cheap reading glasses reflecting the chandelier light, his mind processing patterns and probabilities faster than the supercomputers that powered the billionaires' trading algorithms. The boy they'd invited as a joke was about to teach them something about underestimation. Something expensive. The next 3 hands established a pattern that made the men around the table increasingly uncomfortable. Marcus won 1, lost 1 intentionally to maintain the appearance of a learning curve, then won another with a play so subtle that only Vincent seemed to recognize it for what it was. Thomas Bradford tried to bait him, talking constantly, asking questions designed to distract. "So Marcus, what does your dad do?" "You play poker." Marcus glanced at his cards without expression. "I don't have a dad, sir. Just my mom." The statement hung in the air. Thomas had clearly expected embarrassment or emotion. Instead, Marcus delivered it like a weather report and made a perfect value bet that Thomas called and lost. Senator Caldwell tried a different approach, switching to teaching mode. "Now, son, when you're sitting in early position with a hand like that, the conventional wisdom is to—" Marcus interrupted politely. "Fold, I know. But you're in late position, and you've been playing tight for the last 6 hands. If I raise now, you'll think I'm bluffing because of my age, and you'll call with a mediocre hand. Then I'll take the pot." He did exactly that. The senator stared at his depleted chip stack like it had personally betrayed him. Vincent leaned back his chair, fingers steepled, no longer playing every hand. He was watching Marcus the way a scientist watches a newly discovered species. Not with affection or amusement, with clinical fascination. "Diana," Vincent said without looking away from Marcus, "your son has quite the analytical mind. Where did he develop these skills?" Diana, still standing by the wall, chose her words carefully. "He teaches himself, sir. Books from the library. Videos online. He's always been good with numbers." "Just numbers?" Vincent's eyes flickered to her briefly. "Or people, too?" The question landed like a challenge. Diana didn't answer. Marcus won another hand, this time reading a bluff from General Harrison that was hidden beneath 3 layers of military-grade misdirection. The general had bet aggressively with nothing, assuming his reputation would carry the pot. Marcus called him without hesitation. "How did you know?" Harrison demanded, more curious than angry. "Your breathing changed, sir. When you have a strong hand, you breathe normally. When you're bluffing, you take shallow breaths through your nose, like you're preparing for conflict." The general blinked. "I served in 2 wars, son. Nobody's ever read me like that." "Respectfully, sir, you weren't playing against people who were studying you. You were commanding them." Vincent laughed, a genuine sound for the first time that night. "Oh, I like this kid. He's got backbone." But Marcus noticed that Vincent's laugh didn't include his eyes. And he noticed Vincent making a subtle gesture to one of the security guards, who immediately stepped out of the room with a phone in his hand. The billionaire was making inquiries, running checks. Marcus had become interesting enough to investigate. The game accelerated. Vincent began applying pressure in ways that had nothing to do with cards. He changed dealers mid-game, just to see if it disrupted Marcus's rhythm. It didn't. He introduced speed rounds where players had only 30 seconds to make decisions. Marcus adapted instantly. Then Vincent made a comment that was designed to wound. "Diana, I noticed you went to Thornfield Academy back in the day. That's quite an impressive school. What happened? Why are you cleaning houses instead of calculating derivatives on Wall Street? The room went quiet. It was a violation of an unspoken rule. You didn't openly humiliate the staff, at least not this directly. Diana's face remained neutral, but Marcus saw her hands clench. Life happens, sir. Sometimes paths change. Paths change, Vincent repeated thoughtfully. Or sometimes paths get changed for us. Sometimes people who ask too many questions or see too much find their paths redirected. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. This wasn't random cruelty. Vincent knew something about his mother's past. Something specific. His next hand, Marcus made his first genuine mistake. He miscalculated a probability because his mind was half-focused on Vincent's words instead of the game. He lost a significant pot to Richard Pemberton, who grinned like he'd personally restored the natural order. "There we go," Richard said. "Kid's human after all." Thomas Bradford seized the moment. "Getting tired, Marcus? Want to quit while you're ahead?" No shame in it. His mother's eyes begged him silently to say yes, to take whatever chips he'd won and walk away from this table and these men. But Marcus looked at Vincent and understood something crucial. This had never been about poker. This was a test. Vincent was probing, pushing, trying to find a breaking point. And Marcus realized that somewhere in his mother's past, Vincent had done this to her too. He'd found her breaking point and exploited it. "I'd like to keep playing, sir," Marcus said quietly. "If that's acceptable." Vincent smiled. "Oh, it's more than acceptable. It's encouraged." The game resumed, but Marcus changed his approach completely. He stopped playing to win consistently and started playing to learn. He took risks that made no mathematical sense unless you understood he was testing theories about human behavior rather than card probabilities. He bluffed against Thomas just to see how the man responded to aggression from someone he considered inferior. Thomas folded, then spent the next 10 minutes complaining about disrespectful children. He slow-played a monster hand against the senator to observe whether political training created discipline under pressure. It didn't. The senator paid him off beautifully. He folded the winning hand against General Harrison just to study the man's reaction to unexpected surrender. The general looked confused, like he'd prepared for battle and found an empty field. And with each experiment, Marcus built a more complete psychological profile of every man at the table. Vincent noticed. "You're not trying to win anymore, are you?" Vincent asked during a break. "You're doing something else." Marcus met his eyes directly. "I'm trying to understand how dangerous minds work, sir." The statement landed like a grenade. Several men shifted uncomfortably. Richard actually laughed nervously. But Vincent's expression transformed into something approaching respect. "Dangerous minds," Vincent repeated. "And you think we're dangerous?" "I think power is dangerous, sir. And I think understanding power is important." Vincent stood, walking around the table until he was standing directly behind Marcus's chair. He placed both hands on the chair's back, leaning down to speak quietly near Marcus's ear. "Your mother was brilliant, too. Did you know that? Years ago, before you were born, she built a predictive model that could spot financial fraud patterns before the trades even cleared. It was revolutionary. Companies wanted to buy it. Government agencies wanted to license it." Marcus kept his eyes on the table, but every nerve was listening. But then she asked questions about where certain data came from. She started connecting dots that some people preferred to keep separated. And eventually, she learned an important lesson about the difference between being smart and being wise. Vincent straightened, returning to his seat. Being smart is about finding patterns. Being wise is about knowing which patterns to ignore for your own good. Across the room, Diana looked like she might be sick. Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady despite the fear trying to claw up his throat. "What happened to our model, sir?" "Buried," Vincent said simply, "along with her career. These things happen when people forget their place." The words were casual, almost friendly, but they carried the weight of absolute truth. Vincent wasn't threatening. He was explaining. This was how his world worked. This was the price of challenging power. Marcus looked down at his chips, at the small fortune he'd accumulated through the evening. He understood now that this money was meaningless. It was play money in a rigged game. The real stakes were somewhere else entirely. "I'd like to make a side bet, sir," Marcus said suddenly. Separate from the main game. Vincent's eyebrows rose. "A side bet? What kind?" "If I win the next hand, you answer one question truthfully. If you win, I'll leave the table and never mention tonight to anyone." The room went electric with tension. This was beyond irregular. This was a child negotiating with one of the most powerful men in the country like they were equals. Vincent should have laughed, should have dismissed it, should have had security escort the boy out. Instead, he leaned forward with genuine interest. "What question? Did you destroy my mother's career on purpose? Or was she really just collateral damage in something bigger?" Diana made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She moved toward Marcus, but Vincent held up one hand, stopping her. "That's quite an accusation, son." "It's not an accusation, sir. It's a question, and I'm willing to risk everything I've won tonight to hear the answer." Vincent studied the boy for a long moment. Marcus studied him right back. Two analytical minds, taking each other's measure across a gulf of age, power, and experience. Then Vincent did something nobody expected. He agreed. "Deal the cards," he said to the dealer. "Just me and the boy. Everyone else sits this one out. Winner takes the pot and the answer." The dealer hesitated, looking around the table for guidance. General Harrison nodded slowly. Richard started to object, then thought better of it. Thomas looked like he wanted to flip the table, but lacked the courage. Two hands were dealt. Marcus picked up his cards. King of clubs. King of diamonds. A strong starting hand, but far from invincible. Vincent didn't even look at his cards. He was looking at Marcus. "Before we play this hand, I want you to understand something," Vincent said. "I'm giving you an opportunity to walk away right now. Take your chips. Take your mother. Go home and forget this conversation. Because once you hear the truth, you can't unhear it. And sometimes truth is more dangerous than ignorance." Marcus didn't hesitate. "I'll take the truth, sir." Vincent smiled, and for the first time all night, it looked genuinely sad. "All right then, let's see what cards we've been dealt." The flop came down. King of hearts, 3 of spades, 7 of diamonds. Marcus had 3 kings. Statistically, an extremely strong position. But Vincent had still never looked at his cards. The betting began. Martus bet modestly. Vincent raised significantly. Marcus called. Turn card. 9 of clubs. Meaningless to most hands. Marcus bet again. Vincent raised again, higher. Marcus noticed his chip stack was dwindling against Vincent's aggressive betting, but he called. River card. 3 of hearts. Marcus had a full house. 3 kings and 2 threes. An incredibly powerful hand. Nearly unbeatable except by 4 of a kind or a higher full house. He pushed all his remaining chips forward. All in. Vincent finally looked at his cards. His expression revealed nothing. Then he called, matching the bet exactly. Show your hand, Marcus. Marcus flipped his cards. The full house gleamed under the chandelier light. Several men around the table whistled appreciatively. Vincent slowly revealed his cards. Ace of spades. Ace of hearts. The table erupted in chaos. With the pair on the board, Vincent had aces full of threes, beating Marcus's kings full of threes by the narrowest possible margin. Marcus stared at the cards, his mind reeling. Statistically, the odds of that particular outcome were astronomical. Vincent had played the hand blind until the river, and somehow still had exactly the cards he needed. Diana's knees nearly buckled. Vincent pulled the chips toward himself, not gloating, just collecting what was his. Then he looked at Marcus with something that might have been pity. The answer to your question is yes. I destroyed your mother's career on purpose. She discovered irregularities in an early acquisition of mine. Data manipulation. Insider trading. Nothing that could be proven, but enough to ask dangerous questions. So I made sure she became the story instead of her discoveries. Blamed her for the very irregularities she'd exposed. It's called misdirection, Marcus. Make the whistleblower the villain. The confession hung in the air. Casual. Complete. Devastating. Why are you telling me this? Marcus whispered. Because you asked, and because I want you to understand the game you're trying to play. Vincent leaned forward. Your mother was brilliant. You're brilliant. But brilliance without power is just a faster way to fail. I could offer you something better than revenge, Marcus. I could teach you how this world really works. I could make you powerful instead of merely clever. Marcus looked at his mother, at the tears silently streaming down her face, at the decade of pain and survival and forced silence written in every line of her body. Then he looked back at Vincent. No, thank you, sir. I don't want to learn from you. Vincent's expression hardened. Then you're a fool, and you'll end up exactly like your mother. Brilliant, bitter, and cleaning other people's houses. Marcus stood, his legs shaky but his voice clear. Maybe, but I won't end up like you. And what am I, in your estimation? Marcus took off his cheap reading glasses and tucked them in his pocket. Alone, sir. You're alone. You've got money and power and people afraid of you. But you're sitting in this mansion surrounded by people who would celebrate if you died tomorrow. That's what you are. The room went deadly silent. Vincent's face turned to stone. When he spoke, his voice was soft and more frightening than any shout could have been. Get out of my house. Both of you. You're fired, Diana. Security will escort you out. And if I ever see either of you again, I'll make sure what happened to your career looks like kindness. Diana grabbed Marcus's hand and pulled him toward the door. Security guards moved to follow, ensuring they left immediately. As they walked through the grand hallway toward the service exit, Marcus looked back one last time. Vincent stood at the poker table, surrounded by his wealth and his power and his carefully maintained fear. And he looked exactly like what Marcus had called him. Alone. The door closed behind them, and mother and son walked out into the night, jobless and threatened, but together. Marcus squeezed his mother's hand. I'm sorry, Mama. I didn't mean to. Shoo, she whispered, pulling him close. You were perfect. You were so perfect. They walked to their old car in silence. But Marcus's mind was already working. Building models. Calculating probabilities. Planning. He had lost the battle. But he'd learned something Vincent didn't know he'd taught him. He learned exactly how dangerous minds worked. And someday, he'd use that knowledge. 5 years had passed since that humiliating night at the Whitmore Estate. Marcus Williams was now 17, taller, sharper, but still carrying that same quiet intensity that had unnerved a room full of billionaires when he was just 12. Diana had found work at a university, managing research data for the mathematics department. It paid less than cleaning mansions, but it gave her access to something more valuable, academic resources. And she made sure Marcus had access to everything the institution offered. Marcus sat in their small apartment, surrounded by screens displaying financial data, psychological research papers, and detailed profiles he'd been building for 5 years. Every public appearance Vincent Harrington made, every business deal, every interview, every photograph moment had been cataloged and analyzed. Diana entered with grocery bags, pausing when she saw the displays. You're still watching him. I'm studying him, Mama. There's a difference. She set the bags down, worry creasing her face. Baby, I know what he did to us hurt. But this obsession, it's not healthy. You're 17. You should be thinking about college applications, not revenge. Marcus finally looked away from the screens. It's not revenge. It's correction. That sounds like something he would say. The comparison stung because it was accurate. Marcus had spent so much time studying Vincent Harrington that sometimes he caught himself thinking like him, understanding the patterns that made someone ruthless, the calculations that turned empathy into a weakness to exploit. I'm not like him, Marcus said quietly. I'm trying to understand how people like him operate so I can stop them. That's different. Diana sat beside him, taking his hand. And what happens when you understand? What then? Marcus didn't answer immediately. On one of his screens, a news alert appeared. Vincent Harrington was hosting his annual charity poker tournament next month. The same event he'd been running for years, inviting celebrities and millionaires to play for absurd stakes, while cameras captured everything for his carefully maintained public image. Then I go back, Marcus said, and I finish what we started. The charity tournament was different from the private games Vincent hosted. This was theater, performance, a way to seem generous while actually expanding his network and influence. The buy-in was $50,000, with proceeds supposedly going to educational foundations. Marcus had been saving every dollar from part-time programming work, tutoring gigs, and small investments he'd made using the patterns he'd studied. He had $42,000. Not enough. Diana watched him calculate, and she knew exactly what he was thinking. Marcus, no. You are not using that money for this. Mama, I can win it back. I've been studying these players for years. I know how they think, how they bet, how they crack under pressure. That's not the point. Diana's voice rose, frustration breaking through her usual calm. The point is you're talking about walking back into that world. Those people are dangerous. Vincent is dangerous. He threatened us 5 years ago. What makes you think he won't follow through now? Marcus pulled up a different screen, showing a detailed analysis he'd been building. Because I'm not a scared 12-year-old anymore. And because I've found something he doesn't know I have. He showed her files, documents, patterns he'd pieced together from public records, leaked emails, and financial disclosures. Vincent's empire looked solid on the surface, but Marcus had identified 3 critical vulnerabilities. Investments tied to companies under federal investigation. Offshore structures that were one audit away from collapse. Most importantly, a pattern of witness intimidation and evidence manipulation that connected back to what he'd done to Diana. You're building a case, Diana whispered, understanding dawning. I'm building leverage, but I need to get close to him again. I need him to see me as a threat he wants to control rather than eliminate. The tournament is perfect because it's public. He can't make me disappear in front of cameras. Diana looked at her son, this brilliant boy who'd grown into a dangerously intelligent young man. She saw Vincent's ruthlessness reflected in his strategy, but she also saw something Vincent lacked, purpose beyond personal power. If I help you, she said slowly, if I give you the rest of the money you need for the buy-in, you promise me something. Anything. You promise this isn't about destroying him just to prove you can. You promise this is about stopping someone who's hurt people and will keep hurting people. Marcus met her eyes. I promise. This is about making sure what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else. Diana stood and walked to her bedroom. She returned with an envelope, worn and carefully hidden for years. Inside was $8,000, saved from the settlement she'd received when Vincent's lawyers had paid her to sign an NDA about her firing. I never spent it, she explained. It felt like blood money. But if it gets us justice, then maybe it was worth keeping. Marcus took the envelope with shaking hands. Mama, don't thank me yet, because if this goes wrong, we're both going to regret it. The registration process for the tournament required background checks and financial verification. Marcus submitted everything under his legal name, knowing Vincent's security team would flag it immediately. That was part of the plan. 3 days later, his application was approved with a note requesting he arrive 2 hours early for additional verification procedures. Marcus showed up at the Whitmore Estate exactly on time, wearing a suit he'd bought secondhand but tailored to perfection. The security guard who greeted him was the same one who'd escorted him out 5 years ago. The man's eyes widened in recognition. Wait here, he said, immediately getting on his radio. Marcus waited in the entrance hall, studying the space with fresh eyes. Everything was designed to intimidate. The marble floors, the expensive art, the sheer scale of wealth on display. But he wasn't 12 anymore. He understood that intimidation was just another tool, and tools could be turned against those who wielded them. Vincent Harrington appeared at the top of the grand staircase. He'd aged 5 years, his hair grayer at the temples, his face showing stress lines that expensive skincare couldn't completely hide. But his eyes were the same, sharp, calculating, missing nothing. He descended slowly, taking his time, making Marcus wait. Classic power play. Marcus Williams, Vincent said, his voice carrying that same dangerous charm. I have to admit, when I saw your name on the registration list, I thought it was a joke, or a coincidence. But no, here you are, all grown up and apparently with $50,000 burning a hole in your pocket. Good evening, Mr. Harrington. Thank you for approving my application. Vincent laughed, a sound without humor. Oh, I didn't approve it because I'm feeling generous. I approved it because I'm curious. What exactly do you think you're doing here? Playing poker, sir. Same as everyone else. We both know that's not true. Vincent stepped closer, invading Marcus's space deliberately. You're here because you think you have something to prove. You're here because 5 years ago, a little boy got embarrassed and sent home, and now he's back to show everyone he's a man. Marcus didn't step back. Actually, sir, I'm here because I've spent 5 years studying game theory, behavioral economics, and psychological modeling. I've played thousands of hands online, tested every strategy, and built probability engines that can predict human behavior with remarkable accuracy. I'm here because I'm ready. Vincent's smile faltered for just a moment. Ready for what? To understand the difference between having power and deserving it. The statement hung between them, weighted with implication. Vincent's jaw tightened, and Marcus saw something flicker in his eyes. Not fear exactly, more like recognition that this wouldn't be the simple humiliation he'd anticipated. The tournament starts in an hour, Vincent said, stepping back. Try not to embarrass yourself too badly. The cameras will be recording everything, and I'd hate for your failure to go viral. Marcus nodded respectfully and moved toward the tournament room, but Vincent called after him. One more thing, Marcus. Your mother isn't here to protect you this time. You're in the deep water alone. Remember that when you're drowning. Marcus turned back, his expression neutral. My mother taught me how to swim, Mr. Harrington. You should remember that when I'm pulling you under. The tournament room was set up for spectacle. Multiple cameras, professional lighting, an elevated main table for the final rounds, and crowds of wealthy spectators treating the event like a sporting match. Marcus recognized several players from news coverage, a tech CEO famous for his aggressive business tactics, a celebrity poker champion, a retired athlete who transitioned into high-stakes gambling. And at the center of it all, Vincent Harrington, playing the gracious host while his eyes constantly tracked Marcus's movement through the room. The early rounds were straightforward. Marcus played conservatively, advancing through each table without drawing excessive attention. He won enough to progress, but not enough to seem threatening. Several players tried to engage him in conversation, fishing for information about his background, his training, his strategy. He gave them nothing useful. By the third round, the field had narrowed to 20 players. The blinds had increased significantly, forcing aggressive play. Marcus noticed Vincent watching from the elevated platform, speaking quietly to someone Marcus recognized from his research. Daniel Foster, Vincent's head of security, and the man who'd conducted the background check on Diana 5 years ago. They were planning something. During the break, Marcus received a text from an unknown number. You're being moved to table 3 for the next round. VH wants you close. Marcus smiled slightly. Vincent was pulling strings, manipulating the brackets to engineer a confrontation. Perfect. That meant Marcus was already under his skin. Table 3 turned out to be the feature table, the one with the most cameras positioned directly in front of Vincent's observation platform. The other players were high-profile personalities who would attract viewers when the edited footage aired later. Marcus took his seat and immediately began his real work. While the other players focused on their cards and their chip counts, Marcus was building psychological profiles. The tech CEO had a tell so obvious it was almost comical. He touched his wedding ring whenever he was uncertain. The poker champion was actually the most predictable because her training made her too systematic, too reliant on standard, optimal strategies that a computer could map easily. But Marcus was most interested in the player to his left, Thomas Bradford, the venture capitalist who'd been at that private game 5 years ago. The man who'd called Marcus's big win beginner's luck and spent the rest of that night seething. Thomas recognized him immediately. You got to be kidding me. The kid from Vincent's private game. Good evening, Mr. Bradford. It's been a while. Thomas's face flushed. What are you doing here? This is a serious tournament, not a place for amateurs reliving their one lucky night. I'm here to play poker, sir. Same as you. We'll see how long that lasts. The round began, and Marcus immediately noticed something interesting. Thomas was playing too aggressively, trying to intimidate him specifically, making oversized bets designed to force Marcus into uncomfortable decisions. It was personal, emotional, exactly the kind of exploitable pattern Marcus had been hoping for. Marcus folded the first 3 hands without resistance. letting Thomas believe the intimidation was working. The man's confidence grew with each fold, his bets becoming even more reckless. Then Marcus sprung the trap. He played a medium-strength hand with unusual passivity, checking when he should have bet, calling when he should have raised. Thomas, convinced Marcus was terrified, pushed all in on a bluff. Marcus called instantly, showing two pair that beat Thomas's ace-high nothing. Thomas erupted from his seat. "That's impossible. You played that hand like a complete amateur." Or, Marcus said quietly, "I played it like someone who knew exactly what you would do if I showed weakness." The table went silent. The poker champion studied Marcus with new interest. The tech CEO actually laughed nervously. Thomas gathered his belongings, his tournament over, his face purple with rage. As he passed Vincent's platform, Marcus saw them exchange words. Vincent's expression darkened. The rounds continued. Marcus advanced methodically, never flashy, never aggressive, but somehow always accumulating chips. By the final table, he'd built the third largest stack without winning a single dramatic hand. It was death by 1,000 cuts, precise and almost invisible. Vincent descended from his platform and took a seat at the commentary table, speaking into a microphone for the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're down to our final 6 players. Quite an interesting group we have here." He went through each player's background, their accomplishments, their net worth. When he got to Marcus, his tone changed subtly. "And our youngest finalist, Marcus Williams, 17 years old, a complete unknown in the poker world. No tournament history, no major wins, seemingly appearing out of nowhere. It's quite the Cinderella story, though I have to wonder if the clock is about to strike midnight." Marcus met Vincent's eyes across the room and smiled. The final table began with cautious play. Everyone knew they were one mistake away from elimination, one bad read from watching their buy-in evaporate. Except Marcus. He played with complete calm, like the outcome was already determined and they were all just acting out a script he'd written. He eliminated the tech CEO with a well-timed bluff. Then the retired athlete with a calculated value bet that the man couldn't fold to despite having nothing. The poker champion lasted longer, but Marcus eventually caught her in a pattern she didn't know she was displaying, a slight hesitation before major bluffs that was invisible to most observers but glaring to someone who'd studied behavioral microexpressions for 5 years. Down to 3 players. Marcus, a hedge fund manager named Robert Peterson, and an oil heir named Christopher Dawson. Between the 3 of them, they controlled over $2 million in chips. Vincent's voice came through the speakers. "I have a proposal for our final 3. What if we made this more interesting? Instead of just playing for the prize pool, what if we added some real-world stakes to the final hands?" The crowd murmured with excitement. This was the kind of theater they'd paid to see. Robert leaned forward. "What kind of stakes?" "Personal stakes. Each player ontests something beyond money. A favor, a connection, a piece of information. Winner takes all." Christopher frowned. "That's not standard tournament procedure." "No," Vincent agreed. "But this is my tournament, and I find standard procedures boring." Marcus spoke up, his voice carrying clearly. "I'll agree to those terms, Mr. Harrington, but only if you join us at the table." The room went completely silent. Vincent's smile froze. "Excuse me? You want real stakes, real drama? Then play yourself. Put something of yours on the line. Otherwise, this is just another performance where you risk nothing." The crowd was electric with anticipation. Robert and Christopher exchanged glances, sensing blood in the water. Vincent couldn't refuse without looking weak in front of cameras and witnesses. Vincent stood slowly. "All right, Marcus, you want me at the table? I'll play. But when I take everything you have, remember you asked for this." He walked down to the final table and took the empty seat directly across from Marcus. Security brought him a massive chip stack, enough to match all 3 remaining players combined. The dynamic had completely changed. This was no longer a tournament. This was a direct confrontation, and everyone in the room knew it. Vincent shuffled the cards himself, his movements practiced and smooth. "Let's establish stakes, shall we? I'll go first. If I win this hand, Marcus leaves my property and signs an NDA agreeing never to mention my name publicly again." Marcus nodded. "And if I win, You provide complete access to all records related to my mother's termination from her position at Thornfield Analytics. Every email, every memo, every piece of evidence that was used to destroy her career. Vincent's hands paused for just a fraction of a second. That information is sealed by multiple legal agreements. Then I guess you better not lose. Robert and Christopher quickly opted out, pushing their chairs back. They hadn't signed up for whatever personal war was playing out between these two. Vincent dealt the cards. Just him and Marcus. The hand played out in near silence. Each bet was measured, calculated, weighted with years of history and future consequences. Marcus could feel his mother's presence even though she wasn't in the room. This hand was for her, for the career Vincent had destroyed, for the decade of survival and silence she'd endured. The river card fell. Marcus had a straight. Strong, but not unbeatable. Vincent studied him across the table. You've got something. I can see it in the way you're breathing. But is it enough? Marcus pushed all his chips forward. All in. Vincent called without hesitation. They flipped their cards simultaneously. Marcus is straight. Vincent's flush. The room erupted. Vincent had won. Marcus stared at the cards, his 5-year plan collapsing in a single hand. Vincent stood, collecting the chips. The NDA will be ready for your signature within the hour. I'll have my lawyers draft it. And Marcus? Thank you for the entertainment. It was almost like watching your 12-year-old self again. Still brilliant. Still ultimately predictable. But Marcus wasn't looking at the cards anymore. He was looking at his phone, which had just received a message from a number he'd been waiting 5 years to hear from. His mother's old colleague from Thornfield, the behavioral economics professor. The message was simple. Data analysis complete. Sending to partners now. Marcus looked up at Vincent and smiled. Not the smile of someone who'd lost. The smile of someone whose real game was just beginning. Mr. Harrington, I need to clarify something. I never said this hand was the stakes. I said I'd agree to your terms. But my terms haven't been revealed yet. Vincent's smile faltered. What are you talking about? Marcus stood, pulling out a small recording device that had been running the entire tournament. Every word you've said tonight. Every admission about sealed records. Every threat. All recorded. All being transmitted in real time to investigative journalists, federal auditors, and legal advocacy groups my mother connected me with. Vincent's face went white. That's a legal recording. It won't hold up. In a private space, maybe. But this is a public charity event with cameras everywhere. You consented to recording when you sat down at this table. Your lawyers will confirm that. The security team moved forward, but Vincent held up a hand. Around the room, phones were buzzing. News alerts. Social media posts. The story was already breaking before Vincent could contain it. Marcus continued, his voice steady. I didn't come here to win a poker game, Mr. Harrington. I came here to make you play a game you couldn't control. And while you were focused on cards and chips and your usual intimidation, I was building a case. 5 years of data. 5 years of patterns. 5 years of documentation about how you destroy people who threaten your empire. Vincent sat back down, his legendary composure finally cracking. You little. Careful. Marcus interrupted. Everything you say is still being recorded. And the world is watching now. Daniel Foster appeared at Vincent's side, whispering urgently. Vincent's expression transformed from rage to something worse. Fear. The realization that he'd been outplayed, not at poker, but the larger game he thought he'd mastered. Marcus gathered his things. The NDA won't be necessary. I'm going to talk about this. About you. About what you did to my mother, and how many others you've crushed the same way. Not for revenge, Mr. Harrington. For correction. He walked toward the exit, past the cameras, past the shocked spectators, past the world he'd just pulled out from under Vincent Harrington's feet. At the door, he paused and looked back one final time. Vincent sat alone at the poker table, surrounded by chips that suddenly meant nothing, staring at cards that no longer mattered. The game had changed, and Marcus Williams had just declared checkmate. The tournament room descended into controlled chaos. Security guards spoke urgently into radios while guests pulled out their phones, scrolling through breaking news alerts that were updating by the second. Vincent Harrington remained seated at the poker table, his face a mask of forced composure even as his world crumbled in real time. Marcus stood near the exit, watching the dominoes fall exactly as he'd calculated. His phone buzzed continuously with confirmations from the network he'd spent 5 years building. Journalists were publishing preliminary reports. Legal advocacy groups were filing information requests. Federal investigators were reviewing the data packages that had been automatically distributed the moment Vincent sat down at that final table. Daniel Foster approached Vincent, his voice low but audible to nearby cameras. "Sir, we need to get you out of here. The media is already gathering outside the gates." Vincent waved him away dismissively. "I'm not running from a child stunt, Daniel. This is nothing. Legal noise that my attorneys will bury by morning." But his eyes told a different story. They kept darting to Marcus, trying to understand how a 17-year-old had orchestrated something this comprehensive, this devastating. Marcus's phone rang. "Diana." He answered immediately. "Baby, are you okay? I'm seeing news reports. They're saying, I'm Fina, Mama. Everything's going exactly as planned. Are you safe? I'm at the university library." "Marcus, what did you do?" "What we talked about. Correction, not revenge. The files are out. The truth is out. Now it's up to the system to do what it's supposed to do." He could hear her breathing, processing the magnitude of what her son had just set in motion. "Come home, please. Let the lawyers and journalists handle the rest. Soon, I promise." Marcus ended the call and found Vincent staring at him across the room. The billionaire stood slowly, dismissing his security team with a gesture. He walked toward Marcus with measured steps, and the crowd parted instinctively. They stood face to face in the center of the tournament room, surrounded by witnesses and cameras. "You think you've won," Vincent said quietly, his voice carrying an edge of something Marcus had never heard before. Not anger, something closer to desperation. "You think exposing some old business dealings will destroy me?" "I don't think anything, Mr. Harrington. I calculated probabilities. And the probability of your empire surviving a coordinated investigation into fraud, witness intimidation, and evidence manipulation is approximately 8%. Those aren't good odds, even for a gambler like you." Vincent's jaw clenched. "Everything I did to survive, to build something from nothing. You have no idea what it takes to climb from poverty to power in this world." "You're right. I don't know that specifically, but I know what it takes to survive after someone with power decides to destroy you for asking questions. My mother knows. And now, thanks to the documentation going public, a lot of other people are going to learn their stories too." Vincent stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I could still bury this. Bury you. One phone call, Marcus. One call to people who owe me favors, and you become the story. A disturbed teenager with a grudge, fabricating evidence, stalking a respected businessman." Marcus didn't flinch. "You could try, but you'd be making that call in front of cameras, creating more evidence. And those people who owe you favors? They're already calculating whether loyalty to you is worth the investigation they'll face. That's the thing about power built on fear, Mr. Harrington. It evaporates the moment people stop being afraid." A news notification flashed across multiple phones simultaneously. Federal prosecutors had announced a formal investigation into Harrington Industries' financial practices. The stock price had dropped 17% in after-hours trading. Vincent's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and his face went pale. He didn't answer. "That would be your board of directors," Marcus observed. "Probably suggesting you step down temporarily while this blows over. They'll use words like optics and fiduciary responsibility. What they mean is they're cutting you loose to save themselves." Vincent's hand trembled slightly as he silenced the phone. "How long have you been planning this?" 5 years. Since the night you had us thrown out of your house. Since you told my mother that brilliance without power was just a faster way to fail." Marcus paused. "You were wrong about that, by the way. Brilliance with patience is much more dangerous than power with arrogance." Robert Peterson and Christopher Dawson, the other final table players who'd wisely stayed out of the confrontation, were already leaving, distancing themselves from the scandal. The celebrity poker champion was doing an impromptu interview with a news crew that had somehow gotten past security. Vincent looked around his tournament room, at the empire he'd built now fracturing before his eyes, and something in him seemed to break. Not his composure entirely, but something deeper. The absolute certainty he'd always carried. "What do you want from me?" he asked. And for the first time, Marcus heard genuine uncertainty in his voice. "I don't want anything from you, Mr. Harrington. I wanted the truth out. I wanted the records unsealed. I wanted my mother's name cleared and her work recognized. And wanted to make sure you couldn't do to anyone else what you did to us." Marcus picked up his jacket. "Everything I wanted, I've already gotten. Then why are you still here?" Marcus considered the question. "Because I needed to see it. I needed to watch you realize that the game you thought you'd mastered was just one small game inside a much larger one. And in that larger game, you were never the smartest person in the room. You were just the most ruthless. And ruthlessness only wins when nobody's paying attention." Vincent had no response. For a man who'd built an empire on words and manipulation, he was finally completely silent. Marcus walked toward the exit. Behind him, he heard Vincent's phone ring again, and again, and again. Each call another piece of his world, demanding answers, demanding distance, demanding sacrifice. The game inside the game had been poker. The real game had always been justice. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat in a conference room at the offices of Patterson and Hale, one of the most prestigious litigation firms in New York. Across from him sat Jennifer Patterson herself, a legendary attorney who'd built her career on taking down corporate corruption. Diana was beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. And spread across the massive mahogany table were documents, files, and digital evidence that represented 5 years of Marcus's meticulous work. "This is extraordinary," Jennifer said, scrolling through a tablet displaying Marcus's analysis. "The pattern recognition alone would take most forensic accountants months to compile. You did this yourself." "With help," Marcus said, glancing at his mother. "My mom connected me with behavioral economists, data scientists, people who understood both the mathematics and the human psychology behind financial fraud." Jennifer looked at Diana with newfound respect. "Your work at Thornfield was legendary. The model you built for fraud detection was years ahead of its time. When it disappeared, a lot of people in the industry assumed it was suppressed. It was," Diana said simply, "by the man who's now claiming he's the victim of a teenage conspiracy." The news coverage over the past 3 weeks had been relentless. Vincent Harrington had initially tried to control the narrative, painting Marcus as a disturbed young man with a grudge, fabricating evidence to destroy his self-made success story. His PR team had flooded media outlets with counter-narratives about Marcus's supposed instability, his mother's supposedly questionable past. But the documentation was too thorough, too comprehensive. Independent analysts had verified Marcus's data. Former Harrington Industries employees, emboldened by the public scrutiny, had started coming forward with their own stories of intimidation and manipulation. The house of cards was collapsing faster than Vincent's lawyers could shore it up. Jennifer tapped her pen against the table thoughtfully. "The federal investigation is moving forward, but these things take time. Years, potentially. In the meantime, we have an opportunity to pursue civil action. Wrongful termination, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The evidence for all of it is here. We're not interested in money," Diana said firmly. "We never were. I understand. But civil suits serve another purpose. They keep pressure on, prevent settlements that bury the truth, ensure the story stays public until the criminal investigation concludes." Jennifer leaned forward. "More importantly, they give other victims a framework to come forward. You're not the only people Vincent Harrington destroyed. You're just the first ones with the courage and evidence to fight back." Marcus had been quiet, processing everything. Finally, he spoke. "How many others are there? People he did this to?" Jennifer pulled out another file. "Based on preliminary research, we've identified at least 47 individuals over the past 20 years who experienced similar patterns. Whistleblowers silenced, analysts discredited, competitors destroyed through manipulation rather than honest competition. Most signed NDAs. Most were too scared or too broken to fight. 47 people. 47 careers. 47 lives disrupted because they'd asked questions or threatened Vincent's empire." Marcus felt the weight of that number settle on him. We want them to have the choice to come forward, Diana said. We want them to know they're not alone anymore. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Jennifer smiled. Because we've already started reaching out, and the response has been overwhelming. Over the next hour, Jennifer outlined the legal strategy. Multiple coordinated lawsuits that would keep Vincent tied up in litigation for years. Public pressure that would make it impossible for him to quietly settle and seal records. A framework that would force transparency on a man who'd built his entire empire on opacity and fear. Marcus listened, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about Vincent, alone in his mansion, watching everything crumble. He'd spent 5 years imagining this moment, planning for it, working toward it. Now that it was here, he felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, not joy, just a kind of tired relief. Marcus, Jennifer's voice pulled him back. I asked if you're prepared for the counteroffensive. Vincent won't go down without fighting back hard. He'll try to discredit you publicly. Make this about a troubled teenager rather than his own crimes. It won't be pleasant. I'm prepared, Marcus said. I've been preparing for 5 years. And you're sure about testifying? You don't have to. Your mother can speak for both of you. Marcus looked at Diana, who squeezed his shoulder gently. They talked about this. The decision was his. I'll testify, he said firmly. Every person he hurt deserves to see that you can stand up to power and survive. That brilliance doesn't have to bow to brutality. Jennifer nodded approvingly. Then we move forward. I'll file the initial complaints by end of week. After that, everything becomes public record. There's no going back. Good, Diana said. We don't want to go back. The meeting concluded with handshakes and promises to stay in close contact. As Marcus and Diana left the office building, stepping out into the Manhattan afternoon, Marcus felt his phone buzz. An unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him accept the call. Marcus Williams? A woman's voice, professional but warm. Yes. My name is Dr. Sarah Chun. I'm a professor of behavioral economics at MIT. I've been following the Harrington case, and I've reviewed some of your analytical work that's been made public. It's remarkable. Marcus stopped walking surprised. Thank you, Dr. Chun. I'm calling because MIT has a specialized program for exceptional students interested in decision science, game theory, and behavioral analysis. Based on what I've seen, you'd be an ideal candidate. I'd like to discuss your interest in applying for early admission. Marcus stood on the busy New York sidewalk, people rushing past him in every direction, and felt the future suddenly open up in ways he hadn't allowed himself to imagine. I'd be very interested in that conversation, he said carefully. Excellent. I'll have my assistant send you information. And Marcus? What you've done, standing up to someone that powerful at your age, that takes more than intelligence. That takes character. We need more of that in the world. The call ended. Marcus looked at his mother, who'd been listening with growing pride. MIT, she said softly. Baby, do you know what that means? It means I get to study how power works, how to recognize it, analyze it, and maybe help other people understand it too. Marcus started walking again. It means Vincent Harrington tried to teach me that power is everything. And instead, I learned that understanding power is the first step to dismantling it. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, mother and son, survivors of a system designed to crush people like them. Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. Vincent Harrington had stepped down as CEO of Harrington Industries, citing health reasons. The board had appointed an interim replacement and announced a complete internal review of business practices. He's falling, Diana observed, reading over Marcus's shoulder. No, Marcus Corrective. He's already fallen. This is just gravity finishing the job. That evening, Marcus sat in their apartment, going through emails from people he'd never met. Former Harrington employees thanking him for his courage. Journalists asking for interviews. Legal advocates requesting his data for other investigations into corporate corruption. One email stood out. It was from a professor at Thornfield Analytics, the place where his mother's career had been destroyed. Dear Mr. Williams and Ms. Williams, on behalf of Thornfield Analytics, I want to apologize for the injustice done to your family. Recent revelations about Mr. Harrington's manipulation of our internal investigation have prompted a complete review of Ms. Williams's termination. We would like to formally clear her record, restore her standing, and invite her to present her original fraud detection model at our annual symposium. The model you created, Ms. Williams, was groundbreaking. It deserved recognition, not suppression. We cannot undo the past decade of harm, but we can ensure the truth is finally acknowledged. Diana read the email 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Marcus held her hand, saying nothing, letting her feel everything she'd been denied for 10 years. "They want me to present my work," she whispered. "After all this time, they want to hear what I was trying to tell them." "You were right, Mama. You were always right. It just took the world a while to catch up." She pulled him into a tight embrace. "You did this. You made them listen." "No," Marcus said gently. "You built the model. You asked the dangerous questions. You survived when they tried to break you. I just made sure people couldn't ignore the truth anymore." Late that night, Marcus received one final message. From Vincent Harrington. "You wanted to understand how dangerous minds work. Congratulations. You become one. I hope that doesn't cost you as much as it cost me." Marcus stared at the message for a long time. Then he deleted it without responding. Vincent was wrong about one thing. Marcus hadn't become a dangerous mind. He'd become something much more threatening to people like Vincent. He'd become someone who understood danger and chose something different. The poker game that started 5 years ago had finally ended. Vincent had lost everything. His company, his reputation, his power, his carefully constructed empire of fear. But Marcus had gained something more valuable than any pot he could have won at that table. He'd gained proof that truth, patience, and intelligence could defeat power built on cruelty. And in a world that often taught the opposite lesson, that was worth more than all of Vincent Harrington's money combined. The house of cards had fallen, and from the rubble, something better could finally be built. 6 months had passed since the tournament that changed everything. The legal machinery ground forward with the slow inevitability Marcus had predicted. Federal prosecutors had expanded their investigation beyond Harrington Industries to include a network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and suspicious financial arrangements that painted a picture of systematic corruption spanning 2 decades. Vincent Harrington's fall had been spectacular and public. Every major news outlet had covered the story. Business schools were already using the case as a teaching example of how unchecked power and ethical bankruptcy eventually collapse under their own weight. His name, once synonymous with success and innovation, had become shorthand for corporate malfeasance. Marcus sat in a lecture hall at MIT, where he'd been granted early admission with a full scholarship. The professor was discussing game theory and the prisoner's dilemma, explaining how cooperation often produced better outcomes than betrayal, even when betrayal seemed rational in the short term. Marcus thought about Vincent, about the choices that had led a brilliant, ambitious man down a path that ultimately destroyed him. Vincent had always chosen betrayal, always chosen the short-term win, always treated other people as obstacles or tools rather than partners or equals. His phone vibrated silently. A text from Jennifer Patterson. Verdict in the Thornfield wrongful termination case. "Call me." Marcus waited until the lecture ended, then stepped outside into the crisp Massachusetts autumn air. He called Jennifer immediately. "We won," she said without preamble. Complete vindication. The jury found that Harrington Industries deliberately manipulated evidence, coerced witnesses, and orchestrated your mother's termination to cover up the fraud she'd discovered. They awarded damages, but more importantly, they ordered all sealed records opened. Everything your mother tried to expose 20 years ago is now public record. Marcus leaned against a brick wall, processing the news. "How's my mom?" "She's here with me. Want to talk to her?" Diana's voice came through the phone, thick with emotion. "Baby, they believe me. After all these years, they finally believe me. I never doubted you, Mama. Not once. I know. You're the reason I had the strength to keep fighting." She paused. The jury foreman said something when they read the verdict. He said they wanted to send a message that corporations can't destroy people's lives without consequences. That whistleblowers deserve protection, not persecution. Marcus smiled. That's bigger than just us, Mama. That's what we wanted. Jennifer wants to use this verdict as precedent for the other cases. All 47 of them. Marcus, we're not just getting justice for ourselves. We're creating a path for everyone else he hurt. After the call ended, Marcus walked across campus, thinking about the interconnected web of consequences that had flowed from one decision. His choice to study Vincent Harrington instead of hiding from him, to build a case instead of accepting defeat, to seek correction instead of revenge. His phone rang again, this time an unknown number with a Connecticut area code. Marcus hesitated, then answered. Marcus Williams? A man's voice, older, tired. Yes. This is Daniel Foster. I was Vincent Harrington's head of security. Marcus stopped walking. Daniel Foster had been Vincent's right hand, the man who'd conducted background checks, coordinated intimidation, helped bury evidence. What do you want, Mr. Foster? To talk, if you're willing to listen. Daniel's voice carried none of the cold authority Marcus remembered. I'm testifying for the federal prosecutors. Full cooperation. I've turned over files, recordings, communications. Everything I did for Vincent over the past 15 years. Why? Because I spent 15 years watching a brilliant man become a monster. And I helped him do it. I told myself I was just following orders, just doing my job, just protecting the company. Daniel laughed bitterly. Turns out those are the same excuses every enabler uses. Marcus found a bench and sat down. What do you want from me? Nothing. I'm calling to tell you that you were right. That night at the tournament, when you said power built on fear evaporates when people stop being afraid. I watched it happen. The moment the truth came out, everyone who'd been loyal to Vincent out of fear disappeared, including me. You could have come forward years ago. You could have stopped him. I know. I'll have to live with that. Daniel paused. But I'm calling because there's something you should know. Vincent's lawyers have been trying to negotiate a plea deal. They want him to serve minimal time in a minimum security facility, keep some of his assets, avoid the harshest consequences. Marcus felt anger stir in his chest. After everything he's done, the prosecutors are considering it. White-collar crime. First offense, he's got expensive lawyers arguing that he's already been punished enough through public humiliation and financial losses. Daniel's voice hardened. I'm testifying specifically to prevent that plea deal. But it would help if the victims made their voices heard. If you and your mother and the others told the prosecutors what those minimal consequences would mean to the people he destroyed. We'll make sure they hear us, Marcus said quietly. Thank you for the warning. It's not a warning. It's an apology. A completely inadequate one. But it's all I have to offer. Daniel sighed. You did something I should have done years ago. You stood up to him when it mattered, when it could still make a difference. The call ended, leaving Marcus staring at his phone, processing this new development. A plea deal. Vincent Harrington serving minimal time, keeping his wealth, avoiding true accountability. That wasn't correction. That was just another game, another manipulation, another way for power and money to insulate itself from consequences. Marcus called Jennifer Patterson back. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood in a federal courthouse in Manhattan, preparing to give a victim impact statement. The courtroom was packed with journalists, former Harrington employees, victims and their families, and observers who'd followed the case since that poker tournament 6 months ago. Vincent Harrington sat at the defense table, flanked by 3 expensive attorneys. He'd aged dramatically in 6 months. His hair had gone completely gray, his face was gaunt, and his trademark confidence had been replaced by something that looked like resignation. Their eyes met across the courtroom. Vincent's expression was unreadable. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Margaret Thornton, reviewed the plea agreement the defense had proposed. 5 years in minimum security, substantial fines but retention of personal assets, no admission of guilt beyond what was legally required. Before I consider this agreement, Judge Thornton said, I want to hear from the victims. I want to understand the real-world impact of Mr. Harrington's actions. One by one, people stood to speak. A financial analyst whose career had been destroyed when he questioned accounting irregularities. A journalist who'd been sued into bankruptcy for investigating Harrington Industries. A compliance officer who'd reported safety violations and found herself unemployable within a week. Then it was Diana's turn. She walked to the podium with quiet dignity, Marcus watching from the gallery. She'd prepared remarks, but when she started speaking, she set her notes aside. 20 years ago, I built a model that could have prevented billions in fraud losses. I brought evidence to my supervisors showing systematic manipulation of financial data. And for that, Vincent Harrington destroyed my career, my reputation, and my livelihood. Diana's voice was steady, clear. But that's not the worst thing he did. She turned to look directly at Vincent. The worst thing you did was make my brilliant, curious, kind-hearted son spend his childhood watching his mother struggle. Watching me work 3 jobs to keep us housed and fed. Watching me pretend everything was fine when I'd lost everything I'd worked for. You didn't just hurt me, Mr. Harrington. You hurt a child who'd done nothing except have the misfortune of being my son. Vincent looked down at the table, unable to hold her gaze. That child grew up studying you, learning from you. Not learning how to be like you, but learning how people like you think, how you operate, how you justify cruelty as strategy. Diana's voice strengthened, and he used that knowledge to do what I couldn't do alone. He exposed you, not for revenge, but so no other child would have to watch their parent be destroyed by someone who treated human beings like chess pieces. She returned to her seat. Marcus squeezed her hand. Then the judge called his name. Marcus approached the podium. Every camera in the courtroom focused on him. The 17-year-old who'd taken down a billionaire. The prodigy who'd beaten the system. The face of a new generation refusing to accept that power meant freedom from consequences. Your Honor, Marcus began, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the courtroom. I've spent 6 years studying Vincent Harrington. I know how he thinks, how he strategizes, how he's always looking for the angle, the edge, the way to turn a loss into a win. He looked at Vincent directly. This plea deal is just another game to him. Another way to minimize damage, control the narrative, find the loophole. 5 years in a comfortable facility isn't justice. It's a timeout, a brief inconvenience before he resurfaces with a new company, new strategies, same fundamental approach to treating people as disposable. Marcus placed his prepared statement on the podium, but didn't read from it. I'm 17 years old. I'm about to start studying behavioral economics and decision science at MIT. I want to understand how systems work, how to identify corruption before it metastasizes, how to build frameworks that protect whistleblowers instead of punishing them. He paused. But every single thing I'm able to do, every opportunity one have, exists because my mother sacrificed her career and her peace to keep me safe and educated despite what Vincent Harrington did to us. The courtroom was absolutely silent. If this court accepts a plea deal that treats corporate fraud and witness intimidation as minor infractions deserving minimal consequences, it sends a message. It tells every future Vincent Harrington that the worst that can happen is a few years of inconvenience and some financial penalties that barely dent your fortune. It tells every future whistleblower that coming forward means risking everything while the people they expose risk almost nothing. Marcus looked up at Judge Thornton. My mother taught me that true intelligence means understanding consequences, not just for yourself, but for everyone affected by your choices. Vincent Harrington spent decades proving he never learned that lesson. This court has an opportunity to teach it to him now and to everyone watching this case. Please don't waste that opportunity on a deal that treats justice like a negotiation. He returned to his seat. Diana pulled him close, whispering, "Perfect. That was perfect." Judge Thornton took a recess to consider the statements. 2 hours later, she returned with her decision. I've reviewed the proposed plea agreement carefully, she began. I've also listened to the victims whose lives were upended by Mr. Harrington's actions. And I've concluded that the proposed agreement does not adequately serve the interests of justice. Vincent's attorneys immediately began conferring urgently. Mr. Harrington, you stand convicted of fraud, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. The pattern of behavior revealed through this investigation shows not isolated mistakes, but systematic abuse of power spanning 2 decades. The court finds that minimum security and minimal asset forfeiture would not adequately reflect the severity of these crimes or provide appropriate deterrence. Judge Thornton read her sentence: 15 years in federal prison, complete forfeiture of assets beyond what was necessary for basic restitution to victims, permanent prohibition from serving in corporate leadership roles, additional civil penalties that would consume the remainder of his fortune. Vincent's face remained impassive, but Marcus saw his hands shake slightly as he gripped the edge of the table. The courtroom erupted in response. Journalists rushed out to file stories. Victims embraced each other, crying with relief and vindication. Diana sat frozen, processing the reality that the man who'd haunted their lives for 20 years would finally face genuine consequences. Marcus felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a quiet sense of completion. The equation had balanced. The pattern had resolved. The game was finally, truly over. As the courtroom cleared, Vincent was led away by federal marshals. At the door, he turned back and looked at Marcus one final time. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Marcus saw something he'd never expected to see in Vincent Harrington. Acceptance, not of guilt or wrongdoing, perhaps, but acceptance that he'd lost, that the world had changed, that the rules he'd exploited for so long no longer applied. Then he was gone, disappeared through a door that would lead to a very different life than the one he'd built. Outside the courthouse, Marcus and Diana were immediately surrounded by reporters. Jennifer Patterson stepped forward to manage the media circus, but one journalist shouted a question directly to Marcus. What does it feel like to take down one of the most powerful men in the country at 17 years old? Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. I didn't take him down. He built a house of cards, and I just waited for the wind to blow. Truth doesn't need to be powerful. It just needs to be persistent. 1 year later, Marcus stood at a podium in the Thornfield Analytics Auditorium, watching nearly 300 people take their seats. Behavioral economists, data scientists, financial analysts, legal advocates, students, and journalists all gathered for what had been billed as a landmark presentation on fraud detection and whistleblower protection. But Marcus wasn't the one presenting. His mother was. Diana Williams walked onto the stage to sustain applause. She wore a navy suit, her hair styled professionally, her bearing confident. She looked nothing like the exhausted cleaning woman who'd warned her 12-year-old son to stay quiet and invisible in a billionaire's mansion. She looked like the brilliant analyst she'd always been, finally given the platform she deserved 2 decades ago. Marcus sat in the front row, watching with pride as his mother pulled up the first slide of her presentation. The fraud detection model she'd built 20 years ago, updated and enhanced with modern machine learning techniques, capable of identifying financial manipulation patterns across vast datasets in real time. 20 years ago, I tried to present this model to my employers, Diana began, her voice steady and clear. I was shut down, discredited, and eventually terminated for asking questions that threatened powerful interests. But the model was sound. The mathematics were correct. The patterns I identified were real. She clicked to the next slide, showing case after case where her original model, had it been implemented, would have detected fraud that cost investors billions. Today, I'm not presenting this model as a vindication, though it is that. I'm presenting it as a tool, a framework that organizations can use not just to detect fraud, but to protect the people brave enough to report it. The presentation lasted 90 minutes. Diana walked through the technical details, the practical applications, and most importantly, the ethical framework for ensuring that fraud detection systems couldn't be weaponized against honest analysts by the very executives committing fraud. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. During the question-and-answer session, a young woman in the audience stood up. Ms. Williams, what advice would you give to someone who discovers wrongdoing in their organization but is afraid to report it? Diana looked at Marcus before answering. Document everything. Build your case carefully. Find allies who share your commitment to truth. And remember that silence protects corrupt systems, while speaking up protects future victims. She paused. But also, be realistic about the cost. Whistleblowing is not free. It requires courage, sacrifice, and often years of struggle. Don't let anyone romanticize that reality. But it's worth it, the young woman pressed. Diana smiled. Asked me 20 years ago, and I might have said no. I lost my career, my reputation, nearly everything. But today, standing here, knowing that my work might prevent others from experiencing what my family endured. She nodded firmly. Yes, it was worth it. After the presentation, Marcus joined his mother backstage. She was surrounded by people wanting to discuss implementations, collaborations, and research partnerships. The model she built in obscurity was finally getting the recognition it deserved. Jennifer Patterson appeared, grinning. 3 universities want to license the model. 4 corporations want to implement it. And the SEC just contacted me about exploring a government partnership for regulatory oversight. Diana looked overwhelmed. I never imagined. You built something revolutionary, Jennifer said. The world just needed time to catch up. Later that evening, Marcus and Diana sat in a small cafe near MIT campus, processing the day's events. The cafe was nearly empty, just a few students scattered at various tables, absorbed in laptops and textbooks. How does it feel? Marcus asked. Finally getting to present your work? Diana stirred her coffee thoughtfully. Surreal, validating, but also strange. I spent so many years thinking of myself as someone who'd failed, who'd been defeated by the system, reshaping that identity into someone who fought the system and won. It takes time. You never fail, Mama. You just encountered someone powerful enough to delay your success. That's different. She reached across the table and took his hand. You gave me my voice back. You gave me proof that standing up to corruption wasn't naive or futile. That matters more than any presentation or recognition. Marcus squeezed her hand. We gave each other our voices back. You taught me that brilliance means nothing without integrity. I just helped prove that integrity doesn't have to surrender to power. His phone buzzed. An email from Dr. Sarah Chun, his advisor at MIT. The subject line read, Research Opportunity, Behavioral Patterns in Corporate Governance. He skimmed the email quickly. A major foundation wanted to fund research into early warning systems for corporate fraud, using behavioral analysis and pattern recognition to identify high-risk executives before they could cause massive damage. They wanted Marcus to lead the student research team. What is it? Diana asked, reading his expression. Dr. Chen wants me to lead a research project on identifying corrupt executives before they can cause systemic damage. Basically, building a behavioral early warning system. Diana laughed. Of course she does. You spent 6 years building exactly that for one specific executive. Now you get to scale it. Marcus thought about Vincent Harrington, now in his 2nd year of a 15-year federal prison sentence. Occasional news stories mention him, usually in the context of other corporate fraud cases being compared to his spectacular fall. He'd filed appeals, all rejected. He'd given a few interviews from prison, claiming to be a changed man, a victim of overreach and public hysteria. Nobody believed him. But Marcus didn't spend much time thinking about Vincent anymore. That chapter had closed. The question now wasn't what had happened, but what came next. I think I'm going to accept, Marcus said. If we can build systems that catch the next Vincent Harrington before he destroys 47 careers, that seems worth doing. Just promise me you won't spend your entire life fighting other people's monsters, Diana said gently. You're 18 years old. You should be thinking about your own dreams, not just stopping other people's nightmares. Marcus considered that. What if my dream is a world where brilliant people don't get destroyed for telling the truth? Where power comes with actual accountability? Where kids don't have to watch their parents be crushed by systems designed to protect the powerful? Diana's eyes filled with tears. Then I raised you exactly right. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. Mother and son, survivors who'd become something more. Not just survivors, architects of a better system. 3 months later, Marcus presented his preliminary research at a conference on corporate ethics. The auditorium was packed with executives, academics, regulators, and journalists. His presentation outlined a framework for identifying behavioral red flags in corporate leadership, patterns of intimidation, evidence manipulation, whistleblower retaliation, and the systematic abuse of power. During the Q&A, a corporate attorney stood up. "Mr. Williams, aren't you concerned that this kind of behavioral profiling could be misused? That it could target innovative executives who challenge conventional thinking?" Marcus nodded. "That's a valid concern, which is why the framework includes safeguards. It distinguishes between leaders who challenge conventions through innovation and leaders who challenge accountability through intimidation. There are clear behavioral differences, and they're measurable." Another questioner asked, "You're 18 years old, and you're proposing to revolutionize corporate governance. Don't you think that's ambitious?" Marcus smiled slightly. "I think it's necessary. Age doesn't determine whether an idea is valid. Evidence does. And the evidence shows that current systems fail to identify corrupt executives until after they've caused massive damage. We can do better." After the presentation, a man in his 60s approached Marcus. He had the bearing of someone who'd spent decades in positions of authority. "Mr. Williams, my name is Howard Kensington. I'm the chairman of a Fortune 500 company. I attended your presentation because I wanted to understand the perspective of the young man who took down Vincent Harrington." Marcus tensed slightly, unsure where this was going. Howard continued, "I knew Vincent. Served on a board with him for several years. Brilliant strategist, absolutely ruthless competitor. I admired him, even as I was occasionally disturbed by his methods." He paused. "Your presentation made me realize I was part of the problem. I saw the warning signs and rationalized them as aggressive business practices. I enabled him by staying silent." "Mr. Kensington, please let me finish." Howard's voice was heavy with regret. "I want to implement your framework in my organization. Not because I think I'm corrupt, but because I want to ensure that if I ever start crossing ethical lines, there's a system in place to catch it. And I want to provide that same protection to my employees who might see problems I'm too close to recognize." Marcus studied the older man carefully. "That's the first time I've heard a CEO volunteer for oversight. Then maybe it's time more of us did." Howard handed Marcus a business card. "Think about it. You've proven you can tear down corrupt systems. Now prove you can build ethical ones." 6 months later, Marcus's framework was being implemented in 12 major corporations as a pilot program. The results were promising. Several high-level executives had been flagged for concerning behavioral patterns and subjected to enhanced oversight. 2 had been removed from positions after investigations confirmed systematic ethics violations. The system was working. But Marcus's proudest moment came when he received an email from a young analyst at one of the participating companies. "Mr. Williams, I discovered accounting irregularities in my department. Under the old system, I would have been too afraid to report them. But knowing your framework was in place, knowing there were protections for whistleblowers and accountability for retaliation, I came forward. They investigated. They found the fraud. And I didn't lose my job. Thank you for building a system where telling the truth doesn't destroy your life." Marcus showed the email to his mother that evening. She read it twice, then pulled him into a tight embrace. "This is what correction looks like," she whispered. "Not just punishing the guilty, but protecting the innocent." 2 years after Vincent Harrington's sentencing, Marcus was invited to give the commencement address at Thornfield Analytics' annual graduation ceremony for their data science program. He stood before 100 young analysts about to enter the workforce, and he thought carefully about what he wanted to say. "You're graduating with extraordinary skills," he began. "Skills that can detect patterns, analyze systems, and understand complex data sets. The corporations and organizations that hire you will expect you to use those skills to maximize profit, minimize risk, and maintain competitive advantage." He paused, looking out at the eager young faces. "But I'm here to tell you that your skills carry a responsibility beyond profit margins. When you detect fraud, report it. When you see abuse of power, document it. When you witness corruption, speak up. Not because it's easy or safe or career-enhancing, but because systems only stay corrupt when good people choose silence over truth." A ripple of applause started in the audience. "My mother sat where you're sitting 25 years ago. She built something revolutionary. She tried to do the right thing, and she was destroyed for it. She spent 20 years recovering from the choice to tell the truth. Marcus smiled at Diana, who was sitting in the front row. But that same choice to tell the truth, that refusal to accept that corruption was just how things work, eventually changed everything. Not just for us, but for the 47 other people who suffered similar fates, and for the hundreds or thousands who won't suffer those fates because the system has finally started to change. He looked back at the graduates. You have the skills to be successful, but success without integrity is just another form of corruption. I hope you choose something better. I hope you choose to be the analysts, the whistleblowers, the truth-tellers who make systems better rather than just making them more profitable. The applause was sustained and genuine. After the ceremony, Marcus walked across the Thornfield campus with his mother. The same institution that had fired her in disgrace now hosted an annual lecture series named in her honor. The same building where she'd been escorted out by security now displayed her fraud detection model as a permanent exhibit. Do you ever think about him? Diana asked. Vincent. Sometimes, Marcus admitted. I wonder if he understands what he lost. Not the money or the power, but the opportunity to use his brilliance for something meaningful instead of just accumulation. Do you think he's changed? In prison. Marcus shook his head. People like Vincent don't change because they get caught. They change when they genuinely understand the harm they caused. And that requires empathy he never developed. They reached the parking lot. Marcus was heading back to MIT, Diana to a consulting meeting with a financial services company implementing her model. I'm proud of you, baby, Diana said, hugging him tightly. Not because you took down a billionaire or because you're changing corporate governance at 20 years old. I'm proud because you chose to build instead of destroy. You chose correction over revenge. You chose to make the world better instead of just making yourself feel better. Marcus returned the embrace. I learned that from you, Mama. You could have been bitter, angry, consumed by what he took from you. Instead, you survived, you protected me, and you never stopped believing that truth mattered. Everything I did following your example. They separated, and Diana wiped tears from her eyes. So what's next for the boy genius who changed the world before he could legally drink? Marcus laughed. Finish my degree. Keep developing the framework. Maybe teach someday. Help build systems that protect people instead of crushing them. He paused, and try to have a somewhat normal college experience along the way. That last part's important, Diana said seriously. Don't let Vincent Harrington steal your youth. He took enough from us already. Marcus nodded. I won't. I promise. He drove back to campus as the sun set over Massachusetts, thinking about the journey from that service corridor in Connecticut to this moment. The scared 12-year-old with a notebook full of patterns had become a young man, reshaping how institutions thought about power and accountability. But more importantly, he learned the difference between intelligence and wisdom. Intelligence was understanding the game. Wisdom was choosing which games to play and which to refuse entirely. Vincent Harrington had played a game where winning meant dominating others, where power meant freedom from consequences, where success meant accumulation regardless of cost. Marcus had learned that game thoroughly, and then he'd chosen to play a different one entirely. A game where winning meant building better systems, where power meant responsibility, where success meant lifting others rather than crushing them. The poker table that had started everything was long gone, dismantled and forgotten. But the lessons from that table had grown into something much larger. A framework for justice. A pathway for whistleblowers. A model for accountability. Vincent Harrington had intended to teach Marcus that power was everything. Instead, he'd taught him that power without purpose was nothing. And Marcus Williams, the boy who'd studied silence and patterns and human weakness, had used that lesson to build something that would outlast any empire built on fear. The game was over, but the legacy was just beginning. And in the end, that was the only victory that truly mattered. If this story reminded you that intelligence combined with integrity can defeat power built on fear, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things.